discussion. So what we usually do in this, which I hope you'll join me in, is we do almost like a sort of mini Bible study where we read through the passages together and just talk about what jumped out, and particularly in the context of having just heard the stories from Guatemala, and sort of have a bit of an ideas sharing moment. And then we'll kind of hopefully Francis will be keen to pick out some of the things that we've looked at in the sermon notes as well, to give us a little bit of a starter for our speaking engagements in churches. I'm assuming most of you will probably be speaking on the 11th of May. So we thought we would start with those passages. So there's two lectionary readings for Sunday, the 11th of May. If you are at a church that doesn't use the lectionary and lets you choose a passage, you can always pick one of these. And if not, there are some other suggestions of ones in the sermon notes. But a lot of churches that invite us to speak use the lectionary for the Sunday before Christian Aid Week. So we thought that we would start there.
Yeah.
I wonder if I've got people. Can you see it well enough to read it? If we have a
No,
couple of different people, no. Okay. Maybe Francis and I can read it. Um,
too
so
small.
if that's okay. If I read out the passage from Acts, and then Francis, do you want to do the gospel one, and then we could talk about
Sure.
those together?
Yeah.
Great. So I will read, this is Acts 9:36 to 43. Now in Joppa there was a disciple whose name was Tabitha, which in Greek is Dorcas. She was devoted to good works and acts of charity. At that time she became ill and died. When they had washed her, they laid her in a room upstairs. Since Lydda was near Joppa, the disciples, who heard that Peter was there, sent two men to him with the request, "Please come to us without delay." So Peter got up and went with them, and when he arrived, they took him to the room upstairs. All the widows stood beside him, weeping and showing tunics and other clothing that Dorcas had made while she was with them. Peter put all of them outside, and then he knelt down and prayed. He turned to the body and said, "Tabitha, get up." Then she opened her eyes, and seeing Peter, she sat up. He gave her his hand and helped her up. Then, calling the saints and widows, he showed her to be alive. This became known throughout Joppa, and many believed in the Lord. Meanwhile, he stayed in Joppa for some time with a certain Simon, a tanner.
And the gospel for that Sunday is John chapter 10, verses 22 to 30. At that time, the festival of the dedication took place in Jerusalem. It was winter, and Jesus was walking in the temple in the portico of Solomon. So the Jews gathered around him and said to him, "How long will you keep us in suspense? If you are the Messiah, tell us plainly." Jesus answered, "I have told you, and you do not believe. The works that I do in my Father's name testify to me, but you do not believe because you do not belong to my sheep. My sheep hear my voice. I know them, and they follow me. I give them eternal life, and they will never perish. No one will snatch them out of my hand. My Father, in regard to what he has given me, is greater than all, and no one can snatch them out of the Father's hand. The Father and I are one."
Oh, go back. So those are,
The one you chose.
what was that? Sorry?
I'd sooner go with the one that isn't the lectionary for that day. It sounded much more appropriate.
Oh, they're both the lectionary for that day.
Yes, they are.
Yeah.
But I mean, you chose one that wasn't earlier in
Oh,
this training.
the Romans one.
Yes.
Yes, yeah. So you got the Romans one. It's very, very short, and you might not want to do the wider context. In the sermon notes, you'll also find for the Sunday following, but also some alternative passages, and we've suggested something from the prophet Joel and something from Mark as well. So you've got a whole panoply of different things that you can choose from, depending on what the church wants that you're speaking at.
Well, in my situation, the church will will do what I give them.
Excellent. As it should be. So I wonder whether we've got any thoughts immediately on either of those, on either Tabitha, the raising of Tabitha, or on the John passage, my sheep hear my voice, and any connections that you can see with the stories that we've heard from Guatemala. Please feel free to just unmute and jump in.
Thing that struck me when we were watching the videos and learning very much about what's happening in Guatemala, and to an extent, there is a reference to it in the Tabitha chapter, is water, this constant idea of water. Now, water appears, 2,000 plus times in the Bible when I Googled it a minute ago. So I think being able to kind of tie that in, how fundamentally important that is to Amelia and Aurelia, to the lives that they're living there, to the state of the river, the crops, everything that is so key, and the fact that, again, one of those first acts that happened when Tabitha died was that she was washed. Again, it all comes back to water again, whether it's baptism, whether it's a metaphor for God's justice, whether it's just something that is just so fundamental to existence. Tying it in somehow, I think, that's where my mind was going with it.
I think that's really, really helpful, that sense of water mattering all through one's life, even to the point where, being washed when you've died. That's a fantastic connection. We'll make sure that we capture that.
But also, I mean, these people, they're suffering, and bringing life to them through water is a wonderful gift. So I saw the metaphor of water in the Tabitha one much more than in the John. If I had to use the lectionary.
On a different theme, sorry, sort of art and med here. Different one was that Tabitha, we have the reference to the fact that she was devoted to good works and charity. So right at the very start of Christianity, we have the concern for other people and not just concern for ourselves and what we should be doing. Dorcas, that's what she was famous for. Okay, she made clothes and things of that variety, but devoted to good works and charity was what we heard.
Mm.
And I think that's a really good observation, and it's really important in connection with that in that passage she's described as a disciple. So you're absolutely spot on. It's one of the, very earliest identifications of someone who is a disciple. This is what it is to be a disciple, devoted to good works and charity. So I think that could be a really useful thing to build on. So I really like that suggestion as well. Thank you.
I think it's Chris Wilkes here. I think it's important to realize that we are disciples now. So by dwelling on the passage about the disciple at Joppa, and if we are speaking to people, are speaking to them as a disciple now. So we're doing the same job as she was.
Yeah, absolutely.
And then with John, I suppose in a similar sort of vein as that, when Jesus says, I know my sheep, they hear my voice and they follow me. That's the challenge, isn't it? If we are following Jesus, then it is to do these actions, these good works, to follow his example of charity and giving and everything else. So if we needed to tie those two together, if that's the way that a church ends up going, then that's an option of doing that.
I think that would work really well, and we might not get time for it in this session, but if you look at the sermon notes and you look at the Sunday following, you can always point people to next Sunday you'll be hearing about this. So the following Sunday you have another passage from John, and it's the love one another. And in the love one another passage, Jesus says, "This is how you will know my disciples. They love one another." And so you've got a really nice thing that you can point ahead to there to say, okay, Tabitha's a disciple, shows us what a disciple is like. Uh, that thing of if we hear Jesus and follow Jesus, how does that manifest in our lives? And then looking ahead, next Sunday, you'll be hearing about how that manifests, how everyone will know that you are hearing Jesus' voice and following him, that you are a disciple because you have love for one another, shown by Tabitha in these practical acts of compassion, caring, and charity that she performs. Thank you, Charlotte, that's the John from the Sunday,
No,
the 18th.
I've just brought up the one that we have.
Yeah.
Just as I've loved you, you should also love one another. By this, everyone will know that you are my disciples if you have love for one another.
And one burst into song with that one.
Yes, yes. We've got about another 5 or 6 minutes. So I think we can either have a little bit more from Francis about what's in the sermon notes, or we could take a look at one of the kind of other Bible passages that we've highlighted as an option.
Sorry, can I just say I'm most likely to be sort of leading worship on the 18th rather than the 11th. So are there sort of sermon notes that would go with those readings as well, or
yes, yeah. So yeah, we've got the 11th, we've got the 18th, then we've got alternatives which you can use anytime. And although we don't have a specific plan for that Romans verse, it's used a lot in the worship elements, so you can sort of build on that if you want to talk about that. But yes, Charlotte, do you want to have a quick look at the 18th? Because we've got already that's the John love one another is the gospel, but we've also got another reading from Acts. Slightly trickier, I think, this one.
Yeah, the Acts one's quite long. Is there a bit of it you think would be worth reading out, Francis?
So the bit that I focused on in the notes is the bit, so this is where Peter is being taken to task about why he's been associating with Gentiles and baptizing them, and he recounts the vision with the sheet coming down from heaven. And the bit that I focused on in the notes is the bit where he says the Spirit, I think it'll be on the next verse, the next page, sorry, yeah. The Spirit told me to go with them and not to make a distinction between them and us. So, really interested to hear what others have to say about that. In the sermon notes, you'll see we're talking a lot about kind of expansiveness of love and connection, and linking that to the idea that the world might want us to build a lot of divisions. And actually, part of what we're doing in Christian Aid Week is we're standing for the connections, that the whole world is our neighbor, and that people in Guatemala are as entitled to a full life as anyone, and therefore we have a responsibility to respond to the circumstances that they're in, and not to make that distinction. So you'll see that expanded on the sermon notes, but it's a bit of a tricky one, but very much would welcome anyone else's thoughts if anything strikes you about that.
I was just thinking as you were talking, Francis, about that wonderful story that Jay had about the driver, and the fact that even within Guatemala, the indigenous communities can feel excluded, and kind of relating that then to Jews and Gentiles, and Jesus's love opening that up to everyone, and that actually there are still excluded communities who aren't necessarily known about, and that Jesus's love reaches all. And I don't know, but there might be some parallels to draw.
And the other thing there is that it's also about power in the early church. Who's going to have the power? Who's going to be in? Who's going to be out? And another thing you'll see in the sermon notes is picking up on, where we have conversations now where there are people included and people excluded in terms of making decisions in terms of exercising power when it comes to talking about climate negotiations. Who's at the table, who's in, who's out. Well, you know, Guatemala, who's as a country producing the very low amounts of carbon emissions, but is feeling very full effects, hitting the poorest people hardest, are the people who are out of the climate conversations. So another angle.
Sorry, just before we go, would we actually bring up then climate justice?
Yeah, absolutely. Please do. Yeah.
And I think there'll be more in some of the resources. And we've also just launched a new campaign called the Restore Campaign, which is very much bringing all of these things together about climate justice, about debt justice, about the fact that the poorest communities are those who are suffering from the climate crisis, suffering from debt crisis, and that there's often this kind of can be other elements like a racial justice component, like Indigenous communities being more excluded than others, like the fact that, you know, the global North controls debt and the global South owes the debt, the fact that there are fewer people in those rooms talking about climate change who are from the poorest communities from the global South. So all of that kind of being tackled, and there's an ask to raise with the UK government. So if you want to kind of talk about climate justice and encourage people to act, there will be resources there. We have 55 seconds.
Can I
remaining.
grab 10 of those just to highlight something that Aurelia says that you'll see in lots of the materials, which I think is just a fantastic thing to talk about, is she says, I really give my life to my neighbours. That's what she told us. And that really stood out to me when I was preparing these materials as kind of exemplary of that form of discipleship that we've been talking about, because she could just do this training and just focus on her family and her concerns. She's got a hard enough life as it is. But what she does is she goes to other people in her community and she says, right, I've learnt this, now I'm going to teach you. And she does that all day long. She travels beyond her immediate community as well, just to reach people so that she can share the knowledge that she's got. So that kind of, dedication